Hi, everyone. Welcome to the January 10th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragona. I'll be joined in just a second by my co-host, Craig Milkowski. This week on the podcast, we're going to take a look at a few stakes races. There's not a whole lot of stakes racing happening around the country this weekend, but we'll take a look at the two graded stakes from Gulfstream Park on Saturday, the MarshUS River and the Tropical Turf. We'll take a look at the La Cañada from Santa Anita, as well as the Safe Florida Sandy for Statebreds from Aqueduct. And we'll close things out to spice things up a bit by looking at an allowance race at Tampa Bay Downs on Saturday's card. Craig, how are things going? Looking forward to the racing this weekend?
Yeah, I am. It's a little bit of a slow week, but we need those every now and then. And just because there's not some big name races, I do think there's some pretty good betting opportunities out there.
Yeah, I was going to say, because a lot of the races we chose this week, while there's not many of them quantity-wise, there are some ways to go in these races, I think. So hopefully we disagree a little bit and can talk about some of the many contenders to choose from in these races. Let's begin at Gulfstream Park with those two turf stakes races, beginning with the MarshUS River, a grade 3 event, going a mile and a 16th on the turf for the fillies and mares. And this race has a couple of horses coming out of that Forever Together Stakes at Aqueduct, where Anita Del Sur, who's picked up a lot of checks along the way, doesn't always win races. She's now won 2 of her last 3, one of them being that Forever Together, where she beat Sweet By and By, who's back in the race here. They look like the 2 horses to beat, I think, although I'm not sure that I really trust Anita Del Sur to win another race here.
Yeah, I think you said we might have some differences. It doesn't sound like we will on here. I think the race probably does come down to these 2, but I like Sweet By and By quite a bit more in here. The last race is a bit tricky for me at Aqueduct. It was one, I think it was run over the outer course. Maybe it wasn't. I don't remember. But whatever it was run over some kind of new setup where I wasn't able to make pace figures. But just looking at the flow of that race, it seemed like a race where the pace was really solid. And I thought Sweet By and By had a pretty tough trip that day. She was basically wide the whole way. She moved a little bit early into what I suspect was a fast pace. And she just got run down late by a couple others, including Anita Del Sur, who I think got a great setup that day. So out of those 2, personally, I'm looking for Sweet By and By to turn the tables.
Yeah, I agree. I like Sweet By and By in this race as well. I was a little perplexed by the ride last time. I don't know if it was due to the pace. Maybe it was. I had trouble getting a gauge on how fast that pace really was. But she looked like one of the horses that would be forwardly placed on paper. And for whatever reason, they just wanted no part of the lead that day. She was breaking from the outside post position. And she just got that kind of trip that I don't really like on the turf, where she's 3 wide the entire way, doesn't have cover, is just kind of chasing outside in no man's land. I don't think that's the right trip for a turf horse. And Anita Del Sur, she wasn't on the rail either, but she got to follow Sweet By and By, and I think that always gives the advantage to the horse that's doing the chasing rather than the one that's being chased. So I think Sweet By and By, if she gets a better trip this time, she can turn the tables. We'll see what price they go off at, but I do think Sweet By and By is the horse to beat. I don't want to totally discount Munchkin Money. I know she's maybe a couple low these from a class perspective, but I thought she ran pretty well last time in the context of that My Charmer. Mitchell Rhodes, just a better horse, but she dominated on the front end, and the second place finisher, Take These Change, just sort of ran around on the lead and in second the entire way with that horse. And Munchkin Money was really the only one to make up ground from the back of the pack. So she's got to take a step forward here, but I think Munchkin Money shouldn't be totally overlooked.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's interesting you say kind of no man's land. I'm not sure how much as you got into the game, if you followed harness racing at all. But sometimes these turf trips remind me a lot of some harness races where you just don't want to be outside with no cover. And I think that's exactly what happened. It is just saying Anita Del Sur got the good trip. As for Munchkin Money, my only real reservation with her is she just doesn't have much speed at all. That can be a problem on the Gulfstream course. I haven't seen what setup they're going to run over this week to see how much of an issue it could be. But as far as speed figures go, she's right there with the other 2 that we've talked about.
Now, the one sort of confusing horse in this race that I don't just want to totally gloss over is Magic Star, because she's the only Chad Brown horse in the field, and often those do take their fair share of money just because they're trained by Chad Brown. She's a little difficult to assess based on form, because she was really visually impressive when she won her debut very late in that Travers Day card at Saratoga. But she got a great pace setup that day, and she came back, was bet down to even money in an allowance race. And I didn't love the ride or the trip that day, and I do think she would have finished much closer if her rider had had any more urgency with her, just kind of put her behind a 99-1 shot at the back of the pack, and that's typically not the strategy you want to take on the turf. But still, she's got to run significantly faster to be competitive with these horses.
Yeah, the reason I kind of didn't mention her is she's 9-2 on the morning line. I'd be surprised if she got that. And I mean, it wouldn't shock me if she won. It's never going to shock me if a Trad Brown lately race turf horse wins. But I suspect she'll probably be in the 3-1, 7-2 range. And at that price, from what I've seen from her, I just wasn't interested.
Yeah, I was just pointing her out because it's not really Chad Brown's style to skip a condition with these horses. He doesn't really run them in graded stakes off maiden wins or horses that have allowance conditions available. He takes advantage of them. So noteworthy, and she's probably doing very well to be running in this race, but still, she's got to get faster, and you're probably not going to get that big of a price on her anyway. Moving on to that tropical turf for the Colts and Geldings, going the mile distance on the turf course, grade 3 event, also at Gulfstream. This is a pretty competitive race, and I think we should probably start by talking about the pace projector because there does appear to be a lot of speed in this race. Plenty of horses that really need the lead to be successful. I mean, anytime you just see Guidou's name in a race, you know the pace is going to be pretty fast because he's got one way of running and being successful, and that's going to the front end. And that could really hurt the morning line favorite, A Thread of Blue. We had talked about A Thread of Blue when he was originally entered in the Tropical Park Tropical Derby. I think that's the name of the race from a couple weeks ago, the one that was rained off the turf. And he did not, or rather he was scratched that day. It was won by Halliday. He didn't run in that race, and now he's coming back in this race against older horses. Personally, I think he's actually tackling a tougher spot here and a less favorable pace scenario for him.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with that. I covered this race on out of the gate. And, you know, basically, Guido, he is his silks could be our fast pace flag because when he's in a race going 2 turns, it's pretty much a guarantee that the pace is going to be fast. It was pretty fun this summer watching him in races with Voodoo Song a couple times. But it's not just him. There's definitely some other speed in here. And because of that, I think this race does set up for a closer. I mean, I don't always think that's the case. I'm a little leery at Gulfstream, especially sometimes. But in this case, I landed on Exalting. I think he's going to get a perfect setup. He gets probably he is one of the best riders in the country, no doubt, Irad Ortiz. But I think he will fit this horse like a glove. The horse has taken a drop down in class, which seems kind of funny. Obviously, he was in a grade 2 last time, and just on paper, that's a drop in class. But even the allowance race before, I think, came up a little bit tougher than this with supposedly a grade 3 on paper. And I just think he's going to get an ideal setup. I like that 6-1 morning line, and I will be on Exalting on Saturday.
Yeah, I've got no problem with Exalting. I think he makes a lot of sense in here. He's likely to get the right trip. I know that turf margins can get a little bit compressed sometimes, so I don't want to make too much of the fact that he lost at Fort Lauderdale by just over 2 lengths last time to horses like Instilled Regard and Admission Office, who'd probably be heavy favorites in this race. But he did run well that day, even though he was just kind of sucking along for a minor award. I would definitely use him because I think he's going to get the right trip. I just went back to Mike Maker's other horse, the one who I liked a little bit in the Wood Chopper last time, Empire of War. I know he didn't run well that day. It's hard to really spin that performance and make it sound like he did better than his 9th place result would indicate. But he's got back form that makes him competitive here, or would make him competitive if he could take a step forward off his early season 3-year-old form. And to me, it's always noteworthy when Mike Maker is taking a shot in races like this with horses that seem like they're in over their heads, because over time it seems like these types, they do outrun the rods and they eventually do validate the confidence that Mike Maker shows in them. So it's a little odd that he's running this horse in a grade 3 event, actually stepping up in class off that poor performance last time, but he's got allowance conditions available to him, so he's bypassing those races to run here instead. And he's another one that doesn't really need the lead or to be close to it to be successful. He can come from a little bit off the pace. So I'm hoping that Empire of War can get a trip and sort of take that step forward, because he seems like one of these horses turning 3 to 4 now that might be able to improve just his second start off the layoff. So hopefully he's a bit fitter this time. But there are a lot of ways you can go. I mean, a horse like Tusk, I think, is interesting. I know he looks a little cheap, but he can stalk the pace, and he's been improving lately. Had a bit of a trip last time in that Flaming Crown Emerald when he had to wait for him at the top of the stretch. Even a horse like Maraud has back figures for Todd Pletcher that would make him interesting. So I think it really depends on who's going to work out the trip.
Yeah, and I just want to point out about your Empire of War. That was a pretty strong race last time for a race that was ungraded, just 3-year-olds. The winner ran a 1:15, and it was a race where I do think the track definitely had some give in it on our TimeformUS track condition ratings. We have it as only a 5 out of 10, and barring some weather, I haven't looked too far ahead, but Gulfstream's assured to be much more firm than that, and I think he'd enjoy that a bit more. So he'll have to work a trip out from that rail, but with all the speed in there, he may just fall right into one. And Javier Castellano is a guy I definitely would like on a closer in a fast-paced race as well.
Yeah, there's no doubt he has to improve and run the best race of his life to even hit the board here, but it seems like the kind of race that could fall apart a bit and get a little wacky at the end, so maybe that could help him get into the number. We'll see, but I think both of Mike Maker's horses are alive in this race. Let's head out to California to talk about the Grade 3 La Cañada, mile and 16th on the dirt course for the fillies and mares. And I guess Spice Perfection is she's probably going to be favored here. She's the favorite on the morning line. She is the class of this race, coming off that victory in the Go for Wand last time at Aqueduct. That was the one-turn mile, though, and I know that they've talked about wanting to target longer races with her for a period of time now, and they're doing so here. I'm a little skeptical of this horse getting the 2 turns, though. She really feels like more of a closing sprinter to me, and I just never like these types when they decide that they're going to stretch them out.
I'm with you. I think this is a shot where you have to take a shot against the favorite. I think she's got a lot against her in here. The distance is just one. I didn't particularly like her race last time. She did what she had to do, but I didn't think she looked all that great doing it. It was a crazy slow pace. It was basically a paid workout. And, before that, I guess she ran okay in the filly and mare sprint. She didn't run great, and she just doesn't seem the same horse. I mean, she was a horse who was capable of running in the upper 1-teens, even hit 120 once, I think, on our TimeformUS speed figure scale, and now she's barely hitting 110. So personally, I'm going to look elsewhere. I'll let you go ahead and give your analysis first this time and see where you land.
Well, I'll just say that I think the actual horse to beat in this race is Horologist, because if you can just ignore her sprint race last time in the Raven Run, I know she was 6-1 that day, and there were maybe some things to like about her from a class standpoint, but one-turn racing is just not really her gig. When she stretched out around 2 turns at Monmouth, she immediately got much faster on the speed figure scale, and if she runs back to any of those races, including that cotillion third-place finish, I just prefer her 2-turn route form to the recent form of Spice Perfection, and I think the TimeformUS speed figures really highlight that, because she's run some faster speed figures during that time. So we'll see if she can translate her form out to Southern California for a new trainer, Richard Baltus. But to me, she's kind of the one that I would trust the most. Not saying that I would necessarily pick her, because Bob Baffert's got a couple of horses in this race that I think are intriguing. One of them is Dare Lou, who won back in October at Santa Anita, and the other one is Message. Now, Dare Lou's got the faster recent speed figure, but I'm a little bit intrigued by Message. I know this is the kind of horse that you're probably supposed to play against, because she's coming off this visually impressive win in a race that featured a slow pace over a track that might have been a little speed favoring. But that race last time at Los Alamitos was the first time that she got to go long, and she strikes me as a filly that really does want to go longer distances. Warriors Reward is a versatile enough sire, and the route pedigree on the dam side is really more geared towards stamina. And the way she finished off that race, I know she got a favorable pace setup, but she was just striding out so beautifully through the stretch and just seemed like the kind of horse that really relished the distance that day. And looking through this race, there's just not much speed at all signed on outside of Spice Perfection. And I kind of am a little skeptical that they're going to ride her from a forwardly placed position again. So if Mike Smith can just use Message's speed to get to the front, she could be a little tough to reel in here. She's got to improve. She just has that one speed figure back in her maiden win in June last year that makes her competitive here, but I feel like she's going to run better than she did last time.
I could do that. I did similar. I kind of gravitated towards the Bob Baffert horses, but I wound up settling on the other one, Dare Lou. She's one who's going to have to improve a little bit. I was a little bit worried when I saw her, she hadn't run since October off that big win. But then when you pull up her workout, she hasn't missed a work since. So I don't know if this was maybe the spot she was pointing for, or Bob Baffert just didn't find a spot for her that he liked. But when I went and watched the replay, I really liked what I saw. well. She did sit in behind some speeds, but she was pretty close to him, and she tracked him easily. When she got challenged in the stretch, it actually looked like a horse was going to give her a good fight to the stretch, and she just kind of dug in and pulled away. She's still a young horse. She's just a newly turned 4-year-old filly. So she got a 105 TimeformUS speed figure last time. She will definitely need to improve on that. But much like you're saying with Message, I certainly think that this is a spot where she could do it.
Yeah, I've got no problem with that. Her race last time I thought was impressive. It looked like that horse was coming to her at the top of the stretch, and she turned her away. If she can step forward, I think both of these Bob Baffert horses have a real chance in this race. So, I mean, if I had to break it down, I'd probably use Message over Horologist and, use Dare Lou and Spice Perfection as backups. I assume you'd do something similar, but maybe flipping the Bob Baffert horses. But I do think, as you were saying, that the real strategy in this race is to play against Spice Perfection. Let's head over to Aqueduct, back to the East Coast, talk about the Safe Florida Sandy. 7 furlongs at Aqueduct on Saturday, the 8th race on their card there. And this is a pretty competitive affair. I would assume that my boy Tate's going to take some money here off his victory in that New York Stallion Series race last time in November. That was his first start off a 13-month layoff, and Michelle Nevin doesn't always have them ready to go off layoffs, but this horse certainly was ready to run a good race last time, and I guess if he steps forward off that performance, he's going to be tough here, but he got that wet track that he loves last time. He's probably going to be back on a dry track on Saturday. He's got to get a little pace to close into, and he got it last time, might not get it again this time, so I thought he was beatable because there are many ways to go in this race.
Yeah, there are. There's lots of horses you could like in here. I'm going to go down with the ship one more time, or at least hope I don't. But if I do, it'll be the last time. And I'm going to side with Arthur's Hope. I think he's really got some hidden form off of his last couple races. Our pace projector predicts that he's going to be alone up front. Even if that doesn't happen, he's not a horse who's proven to have the lead. But I just think the last 2 times things haven't gone his way. 2 back, it was over that sloppy track you mentioned. He was dueling wide through a pretty solid pace. And then last time out on a track that I did, it was kind of a funny track. We have it coded as favoring closers. It was a race where Chateau for Jason Service just ran off in some crazy fast fractions. Arthur's Hope tried to keep up and just couldn't do it, but I'm going to give him an excuse for that one. And I just think the pace setup in here can make him turn the tables on my boy Tate, and even T Loves a Fight, who was the runner-up 2 back in that stakes race. One thing I do want to mention, I always have to look at this. It's a race we don't have coded as being a state bred race, but it is. It was one of those New York Stallion Series races. You kind of know it by the horses you see in it, but it's always something that confuses me a little bit, and I got to stay pretty sharp on those.
Yeah, I kind of figured we might be on the same page here because I know we had both had the same opinion about Arthur's Hope the last time when we talked about that New York Stallion Series race. And I agree with everything you said. I think that he didn't get the right pace setup 2 back. Last time out, got outrun to the lead. And if you look through his past performances, Arthur's Hope is a horse that really does need to be forwardly placed, or at least running out in the clear to have his best chance. When he's run these gigantic speed figures in the past, as he did back in May when he got that 120 TimeformUS speed figure, and back in February when he got that 125, it's when he's either on the lead or just off it chasing the pace. And it looks like he's got to be in that kind of situation here because he's got an aggressive rider on board in Kendrick Carmouche, and the rest of this field, they're just not that quick early. I mean, maybe Morning Breeze is going to put a little pressure on him, but he's really more of a turf horse when he shows speed. So I just think Arthur's Hope is going to be out in front. He gets the 7 furlong distance without a problem. And if he runs one of those big speed figures again, he's kind of the horse to beat, and he's not going to be the favorite in this race. So we're on the same page there. As for the others, the other horse I would kind of upgrade a little bit is T Loves a Fight, because while he too was with the pace flow 2 back in that New York Stallion Series race, I really liked his effort last time out in the Gravesend. Firenze Fire is just a better horse than these. And T Loves a Fight didn't get the most comfortable trip that day because he was down inside, taking the kickback early, had to wait for room and upper stretch. And I actually thought if Dylan Davis was able to get him off the rail a little bit earlier, no fault of his because he really had no other choice, T Loves a Fight could have even finished closer that day because he was really finishing gamely at the end of that race. He also handles 7 furlongs, has a versatile running style. So to me, he's the main danger. And I could see his price drifting up a little bit because he's a horse that never really takes a ton of money. So I would mostly focus on these two because I do think my boy Tate might be an underlay here. And the Caretaker is the other horse that's going to take money. He did run extremely well last time for Rudy Rodriguez, and it seems like he's really improved since the claim. I just kind of want to see him do it again against better horses.
Yeah, this is a pretty big step up for him. We're basically the same thing. I'm not just going to regurgitate everything you said about T Loves a Fight. I actually did like his last race a lot, too. So I'll just let your comments stand on that one.
And let's wrap things up on this podcast by talking about that one allowance race that we're going to talk about at Tampa Bay Downs on Saturday. It's the 8th race on their card, going a mile on the turf. And I was happy that you actually highlighted this race because there are some pretty intriguing horses in here. The favorite on the morning line is Jay Beresford Tipton, and no surprise that he lost his last race because he had the misfortune of running into a horse that might be a future Grade 1 winner for Chad Brown, that being Sayoff, who, if you watch that race, I mean, Sayoff looked like he should probably be in the tropical turf that we just talked about earlier because he looks like a stakes-winning miler based off that performance. But Jerry Beresford Tipton stayed on well enough at the end of that race, is definitely getting some class relief here, but he's facing a couple of up-and-comers that I think you might want to take a look at that are pretty lightly raced.
Yeah, I thought this is really just a crazy strong field for a first level allowance with just a $22,000 purse. I think it is. It was pretty shocking to me. And the horse that really caught my attention in here, because I've had him in my stable mail for quite a while. I actually forget what we call it at DRF, but is That Quality, the number 1 for Jonathan Thomas. And I had put him in there because I was really impressed with his maiden win back at Monmouth. I think it was last summer. And the more that race went on, I think 5 next out winners came out of that race. So he's just a horse I've been waiting to see to come back. While there are some decent horses in here, as you mentioned, Jay Beresford Tipton, he's certainly got some talent, but he's a horse who has run in this condition repeatedly. And I think the last 4 times he's yet to even hit the board. So, yeah, he ran against a strong horse last time. But, I mean, he's just a horse who just keeps needing excuses, and he's not getting it done. A couple others in here that I just wasn't overly impressed with. The number 2 seems to be in good form, Hope Again. But he's taken a pretty big step up in class against horses like this. He was running in cheap claimers pretty recently. The morning line favorite, we talked about the 4 horse, the 8 horse, the second choice in here, King Cause. He's another one. He just doesn't seem to find the winner circle. He's 1 for 16, second with a bunch of thirds. So I always look for a lightly raced horse like That Quality in a field like this, who's not even probably not going to be the favorite in the race. And he's coming out of a really strong race. So I'm curious to see what he does because I was impressed with him first time, and see if he can step up off of that race. And I also think he's going to offer some value in here.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that, because you're totally right about the runbacks out of that race, it verifies that it was an unusually strong maiden race at Monmouth. The only thing I would add is that Quality actually ran really well within the context of that race because the pace was honest, and he broke the race open probably earlier than he needed to around the far turn, where the long shot that was chasing him and taking the lead just sort of collapsed around the far turn, and That Quality opened up and kind of found himself out there by himself at the 8th pole. Probably got a little bit green at the end of that race when Mr. Alec was getting to him. He seemed like a horse with a real ability first time out just from watching that race. So who knows what's kept him off the track for 5 months, but if he comes back in form, I think he's going to be tough to beat in this race. The one other horse that I think we have to mention is the one that's drawn on the also eligible list. That's the number 11 U.S. Navy Cross. At first, I had to double check to make sure he wasn't a main track only in this race because obviously he's a horse that was once perhaps on the Derby trail. He debuted very impressively at Belmont. Now a year and 3 months ago or so when he won that 7 furlong race in fast time, but came back and was a big disappointment behind Vekoma and the Nashua, and then was just an utter disaster at Keeneland when he appeared one more time this past spring. But the one thing about this horse that I had kind of forgotten until I looked up his pedigree again is that this horse has always been bred for the turf. And this is one of these Phillips Racing partnership dam sides, the Derby Dan Farm. The dam is a half to Soaring Softly and some other nice turf horses. The dam herself has produced Recepta, who was a graded stakes winner on the turf, as well as some other turf winners. So U.S. Navy Cross has not just in this race to take a shot on the turf. He's always been really well meant for the turf. And I wonder if he's one of these horses that was kind of turf meant, that trained well in the dirt, that Chad Brown just kind of had to commit to running on the dirt because he ran so well first time out. He's given him a couple of workouts on the turf at Palm Meadows this winter, so it's not like they're just experimenting here. If he gets into the race, I think he's one you have to take very seriously. On the other hand, he's trying something new for the first time, but he could be a very short price, so I think you have to weigh those two factors.
Yeah, I'm actually glad you pointed him out. The way our PPs are set up, I just assumed he was a, main track only horse when I glanced at his PPs real quick, and I just didn't pay close enough attention. And now that I look at his workouts, something obviously went wrong after that last race. He didn't work out after it for quite a while, had a couple gaps even when he started back, but he's been working out steadily for a good 2.5 months now. So it looks like this is a race they're targeting, and if he gets in, he'll certainly be worth keeping an eye on. As you said, if he does get in, he's going to be a short price. I would still stick with that quality because I was impressed with his race, and I think he would offer more value. So as a handicapper, I might actually hope U.S. Navy Cross does get in. It may make the race a little tougher, but it could push his price up a little too.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It would make it even a race of stronger quality than what we usually see at Tampa Bay Downs, especially at this level. So it would be great to see all these horses go at it, because I think we might see some horses with futures coming out of this race as long as they all get to participate. Craig, great to talk about these races as always. We'll see what's on tap next weekend. I think we have our first major Derby prep coming up in the Lecomte at the Fairgrounds, so I'm sure we'll talk about that with a bunch of other races on the podcast next week. For now, you can always listen to us on DRF.com, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, or SoundCloud. Wherever you get your podcasts, just subscribe to the Daily Racing Form and make sure to check us out both on Tuesdays when we do the TimeformUS Pacecast and Fridays when we record this TimeformUS Forecast. So thanks for listening this week, guys, and we'll be back at you with the TimeformUS Pacecast on Tuesday.